So when we're thinking about doing an experimental study, we really do need to think about the design of that experiment. Now, the purpose of this experiment is to investigate relationships between variables. So remember, variables often gets capital X's or capital Y's. And just like in algebra, we can think about X as the inputs or the causes, while Y's will be the outputs or the results. So that convention follows here in statistics as well. But remember, proper to study design, we're doing this because we want to make sure that we are getting reliable and accurate data. So some of the variables, there's some vocabulary that goes along with this. When we're looking for the explanatory variable, we talk about that. When a change in one variable causes a change in another variable, then the variable that causes the change is called the explanatory variable. So by convention, we will call that X. On the other hand, there's the response variable. So when a change in one variable causes a change in the other, the variable that was affected by the change is called the response variable, and lots of times we call that Y. When we talk about treatments, okay, this is what the researcher might be issuing. A treatment really is the different values for the explanatory variable, that variable which is causing the change. So the treatments belong to the explanatory variable. We also have something called the experimental unit. You might hear that talked about. It's a single individual to be measured. And, it's not always a person. And we'll see in the next example, it's a plant. Okay, so it's a single individual of the population. So, for example, a botanist wants to compare the effects of two different fertilizers have on plant growth in a field. There are 3 groups of plants that are randomly selected. This is good. They are randomly selected, and we apply fertilizer. Group 1 is going to get the first fertilizer, fertilizer A. Group 2 is going to get fertilizer B, and the last group, group 3, is going to get no fertilizer at all. So the plants are separated, applied fertilizer. A week later, the botanist comes back and measures the average plant growth for each group. Okay, so the average, remember that's a mean. We're going to identify the following. What is the explanatory variable? Which is the variable that we would say has caused the change, and what is the variable that is the response variable? So the explanatory variable that causes the change, that is the different treatments, X is going to be the fertilizer. But what are the results, and what's the response variable? How did that fertilizer respond? Well, how did the plants respond to the fertilizer? That would be the, the plant growth. So then we can say, well, what were the treatments? That is, what are the values of the explanatory variable? Well, the values of the explanatory variable were fertilizer A, fertilizer B, and then there was also the no fertilizer. Okay, so these were the different values or treatments. Okay. An experimental unit is a single member of the population. This is a single plant. What is the control group? The control group will have no treatment given to it, so that would be the no fertilizer group. That is group 3. Versus the treatment groups. The treatment groups were group 1 and 2. Group 1 gets fertilizer A, while group 2 got fertilizer B. And then we have to think, okay, so we get all this data and we collect it. Was there any possible lurking variables? Was something else going on that could affect plant growth that had nothing at all to do with the fertilizer. And it turns out there's actually quite a bit here. We could say, what are the possible lurking variables? What about the location of where the plants were put? Did all plants have equal access to important needs like the sun and water? Was the soil the same for all of them? Etc., etc., etc. So you need to think through, if you're forming the study, what are the possible lurking variables and how can we negate those through experimental design?